Imagine you're reading a brand new, highly anticipated novel.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right, so you're reading this book, and the protagonist, who is a married woman, decides to just completely blow up her family.
Oh, wow. Just totally dismantle it.
Yeah, exactly. She cheats on her husband, she lies, and she operates with this staggering level of selfishness.
Which, I mean, normally that's the setup for a pretty gripping tragedy, right?
But here is the twist. She feels absolutely zero guilt, like none at all.
Wait.
None. In fact, the author frames her infidelity as this, profound triumph of feminist liberation.
Oh, so she isn't the villain.
Exactly. She's the hero. But now, ask yourself this. If a male character did exactly that, abandoned his family, slept around, felt zero remorse, and called it his, birthright, what would...
We'd probably call him a toxic, narcissistic sociopath.
Exactly. But in modern mainstream publishing, it's called empowerment. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a deeply provocative question. Is modern ideology actually ruining contemporary literature?
It's a huge question, honestly. Yeah. It's one that forces us to look right at the bedrock of, why we even tell stories in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Are we writing to explore the messy reality of human nature, or are we just writing to deliver a political lecture? Because when the variety of human experience gets flattens into a single ideological echo chamber, the art form itself starts to suffocate.
Which is exactly what brings us to our focus today. We are exploring a fascinating, really highly analytical video essay by creator Jimmy Kim.
Right, and it's a pretty intense essay.
It really is. The essay is provocatively titled, "Modern Feminism is Ruining Literature."
And just to lay out our mission right at the top, Kim is making a very specific, detailed argument here.
Yeah, she's not just making broad generalizations. No, not at all. She is positing that a pervasive, highly modern iteration of feminism has effectively created a monoculture in contemporary women's fiction. Her thesis is that this ideological shift is actively replacing compelling, relatable human character flaws with rigid, sterile talk.
And before we get into the weeds of her literary analysis, we really need to establish the parameters of this conversation.
Oh, consider this the invocation of the impartiality rule.
Right, the golden rule here.
We are going to be unpacking some culturally and politically charged critiques today. We're touching on gender dynamics, modern feminist theory, the inner workings of the publishing industry, and some very deeply held societal values regarding marriage and biology.
It's a lot of hot-button topics.
It is. So I want to be explicitly clear to you. Our goal here is not to endorse. We are not taking sides, and we are certainly not trying to declare winners and losers in the modern culture war.
Yeah, that's not our job at all.
Right. Our job is simply to act as your neutral guide. We are here to break down Kim's arguments, dissect the evidence she pulls from these contemporary novels, and just help you understand the precise contours of this debate. That way, you can evaluate the literary landscape for yourself. Okay, let's unpack.
To really grasp what Kim is getting at, I want you to imagine the visual backdrop behind us right now shifting.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Picture a brightly lit, somewhat sterile, modern bookstore display, right? Stacked high with the latest trending, brightly colored paperback releases.
Yeah, the ones with the really minimalist bubble covers.
Yeah, exactly, those exact ones. Now, imagine that display slowly fading away to reveal a classic, dimly lit 19th century library full of heavy, leather-bound volumes, smelling of old paper and quiet contemplation.
Oh, I love that imagery.
Right. That visual transition mirrors the core thesis we are examining today. What's fascinating here is Kim's argument that we are witnessing a fundamental shift in the very purpose of the novel.
A shift in the purpose itself.
Yeah. She is suggesting a transition from literature serving as an open-ended exploration of the complex, often contradictory human condition to literature functioning primarily as an ideological vehicle.
Like a delivery system for a specific message.
Exactly. A delivery system for a specific modern set of social dogma.
Right. The idea that the art is being entirely subjugated by the message. And to, understand her argument, we have to start with how she actually defines that. Because she draws a very sharp, very deliberate line in the sand between classic equal rights feminism and the version she described as the dominant modern iteration.
Yeah, she's very careful to make that distinction early on.
She really is. She actually says right off the bat, I'm all for equal rights for women. She isn't arguing against women voting or owning property or having equal opportunity place.
Right. She's not critiquing the foundational stuff.
Not at all. But she argues that today's dominant strain of feminism in literature is pursuing something entirely different. She says this modern version has basically been about wanting to turn women into men.
Which is a really striking claim.
It is.
But when she says this modern movement is trying to turn women into men, she isn't speaking literally, of course. She is speaking behaviorally and psychologically within the context of narrative structure and character development.
Okay, unpack that for me. How does that look in a story?
Well, she is setting up the premise that female protagonists in contemporary fiction are no longer acting like relatable, multifaceted human women navigating a complex world. Instead, they are adopting behaviors that have been traditionally historically associated with men.
Oh, I see.
And crucially, they aren't adopting the positive masculine traits like stoicism or, protective responsibility. They are adopting the toxic, detached, destructive male stereotypes.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Like the hyper-individualism, the fear of commitment, the emotional unavailability. And the authors are framing the adoption of these toxic traits as the ultimate form of feminist empowerment.
Think of it like a massive movie franchise reboot. Imagine a new director comes in and entirely changes the fundamental laws of physics in the universe of the film, but pretends it's still exactly the same world as the...
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. So if a character jumps off a skyscraper and instead of falling just sort of floats away like a balloon, the audience instantly loses all sense of...
Yeah, the stakes are completely gone.
Exact. The emotional physics of the world no longer match our lived reality. If the emotional physics of these characters don't match how human beings actually feel, connect, love, and suffer, does the story fundamentally break? Kim is essentially arguing that these authors have rewritten the emotional physics of women to match the emotional detachment of a stereotypical male anti-hero, and they are demanding we call it liberation.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. If the gravity of human consequence is removed, the narrative just floats away into absurdity. And Kim contrasts this weightlessness in modern fiction with the incredible gravity found in classic literature.
Oh yeah, she talks a lot about the classics.
She does. She expresses this deep, wistful appreciation for them. She talks about wishing we had more female writers from antiquity or the Middle Ages, or just more writers operating on the level of Jane Austen.
Jane Austen is a perfect example here. Austen wrote about women who were incredibly constrained by the society of their time. Like they couldn't own property in the same way, their futures depended almost entirely on marriage, their social spheres were strictly monitored.
Right, very rigid rules.
But their emotional physics were profoundly real. Every single social misstep, every glance across a ballroom, every hidden desire had immense, crushing weight and real-world consequence.
Precisely. The societal constraints in Austen's work provided the gravity that made the emotional choices of the characters meaningful.
Yes.
Kim contrasts that historical depth with what she describes as nagging patterns and irritating undercurrents that she constantly finds in modern books written by women. She sees a profound superficiality that is merely masquerading as rebellion.
Masquerading as rebellion, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because the characters aren't actually pushing back against a rigid society to find deep human connection. They're just acting out without consequence.
She actually points out that these patterns are so deeply embedded in the modern literary water supply that it's incredibly easy to miss them until you actively start looking for them.
Yeah, it becomes background noise.
Exactly. It's like a hum in the background of your apartment that you completely tune out until a friend comes over and says that. And then suddenly it's the only...
And to really hear that hum, to understand this shift in the emotional physics we were talking about, we have to look at how these contemporary characters handled the most emotionally charged, high-stakes topic in human history.
Which is?
Fidelity, intimacy, and the betrayal of those bonds. Because how a character handles betrayal tells you everything you need to know about the moral universe the author has constructed.
Which takes us straight into Kim's analysis of a widely praised contemporary novel called All Fours by Miranda July. This book seems to serve as Kim's primary exhibit for what we might call the promiscuity paradigm.
Yeah, let's look at the basic architecture of All Fours. The protagonist is a semi-famous creative. She is married. She has a child who uses they/them pronouns. A detail Kim notes closely mirrors the author's own life. And this protagonist is currently spiraling into a midlife crisis.
Okay, fairly standard setup.
Right. But the way this crisis manifests is the focal point of the critique. The protagonist begins engaging in multiple affairs, cheating on her husband with both men and a much older woman.
And just to add a thick layer of complex modern entanglement to the situation, the older woman she sleeps with happens to be the ex-lover of a much younger guy the protagonist was also having an affair with.
Yeah, it's very messy.
Kim admits it's a very convoluted setup, but the plot mechanics, like the sheer logistics of the affairs, aren't actually the issue.
Right, it's not about the who slept with who.
Exactly. The central issue, the point where Kim really plants her flag, is the protagonist's internal psychological reaction to all this rampant infidelity. Well, after sleeping with this older woman, the main character feels absolutely no guilt, no wrestling with her conscience, no fear of destroying her family. Instead, she frames the affair as a profound spiritual revelation.
A spiritual revelation? Are you serious?
I'm serious. She thinks to herself, and this is a direct quote from the book, "Was this the secret to this bodily freedom? It felt intuitive and healthy, as if promiscuity was my birthright."
Promiscuity is my birthright.
That specific phrase is the exact epicenter of Kim's critique regarding the massive double standard at play in modern literary.
Yeah, it's wild.
Let's really pause and unpack the mechanics of that quote. If we take this exact character with these exact destructive actions and this exact internal monologue, utterly remorseless, framing the deception of her spouse as a healthy intuition, and we simply flip the gender, what is the cultural reaction?
Oh, it would be instantaneous condemnation, like immediately, completely.
If a male protagonist acted this callously, leaving a wake of broken trust and betrayal, and then sat back and called it his bodily freedom and his birthright, the literary world would instantly label the book a masterclass in depicting toxic masculinity.
They absolutely would.
Critics would write essays about how perfectly the author captured the mind of a narcissistic sociopath. He would be universally loathed. But because the protagonist is a woman, Kim observes that this exact same behavior is suddenly elevated. It is framed as bold, brave, feminist liberation.
It is the ultimate subversion of literary expectation. But Kim argues it is entirely unearned and ultimately destructive to the narrative. And she's very careful to clarify her stance here.
Oh, yeah, she makes sure to clarify.
She points out that she doesn't automatically hate characters who cheat. She's not approaching this from some place of puritanical pearl clutching where characters must be perfect moral paragon. To prove this, she explicitly cites Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina.
Which is such a brilliant comparison. Anna Karenina is arguably one of the most famous, destructive adulterers in the history of literature.
Oh, without a doubt.
She abandons her husband, she leaves her young son, she creates a massive public scandal, yet Anna is a profoundly sympathetic character. Generations of readers have wept for her. Why? Because sympathy, as a literary mechanic, requires self-awareness. It requires a baseline acknowledgement of the moral gravity of the act being committed.
Exactly. Anna Karenina feels the crushing, suffocating weight of her choice. She feels agonizing guilt over abandoning her child. She feels the severe societal stakes of her exile.
It
does. She suffers immensely for her pursuit of passion. She's torn apart by the internal conflict between her duty and her desire. The modern characters Kim is critiquing, however, possess none of that internal friction. They feel nothing. They are just acting, as Kim bluntly puts it, like psychopaths.
To illustrate just how far this detachment from reality goes, Kim describes this truly bizarre marital negotiation scene in All Fours.
Oh, this scene, yeah.
Right. The husband, who isn't portrayed as some controlling monster, realizes something is fundamentally wrong in the marriage. He asks his wife if she's seeing someone else. She admits she did. He asks, is it going to happen again? And she just bluntly, with zero remorse or hesitation, tells him, yes, probably going to happen.
Now, in any normal drama, in any narrative attempting to reflect actual human emotion, this is the climax. This is where the screaming starts, or the crying, or the devastating silence of a life-shattering...
The emotional fallout.
Exactly. But the husband's response to this unapologetic declaration of future infidelity is remarkably sterile. He asks her to, quote, keep it to Wednesdays.
Keep it to Wednesdays, like she's scheduling a weekly spin class or setting a reminder to take out the recycling, not fundamentally dismantling the trust of their family.
It's so absurd.
And then he casually mentions that the same rules apply to him. According to the text, the husband, who the book describes as the monogamous type, gets a girlfriend and only sleeps with her.
Okay, so they both just move on.
The wife realizes this is happening and her internal reaction is completely flat. She thinks it wasn't dead between, but something had to be sacrificed. He needed to feel like a committed, trustworthy boyfriend, and They calmly confirm they won't have sex with each other anymore, and the marriage just fades away into the background.
It just fizzles out.
Kim highlights this as the gradual death of a marriage that feels like a complete non-event in the narrative. Neither the character nor the author seems to recognize the profound tragedy or the emotional gravity of a family dissolving. It just ends with her feeling more free, facing the consequences.
That lack of consequence is the narrative void at the center of the book.
Yeah.
Kim notes her deep disappointment with the end, calling it terrible and hokey, specifically because she wanted to see some genuine reflection on the fallout of this massive midlife crisis. She wanted to see the emotional bill come due.
Well, wait, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Think about the entire history of the novel. Hasn't literature always been about break? Isn't it supposed to push boundaries and explore the transgressive edges of society? If a modern woman wants to write a book about a character completely shedding societal expectations regarding marriage and monogamy, isn't that literally the point in art? Why does she have to feel guilty?
It is a totally valid question, and it is the standard defense of this genre, but it misses the fundamental mechanism of how transgressive art actually functions.
What do you mean?
Well, for a taboo to be broken effectively in a narrative, for it to actually mean something to the reader, the taboo must first possess weight. It must have structural integrity within the world of the story. If a character breaks a profound societal rule, like the vow of fidelity, and faces absolutely zero internal guilt, zero external blowback, and no loss of status or relationship, the narrative tension instantly vanished. The taboo wasn't broken because it just didn't exist in the first place.
It's exactly like playing a video game in God mode. You punch in a cheat code, you get infinite health, infinite ammo, and absolutely nothing in the game can hurt you.
Yes. Perfect analogy.
Sure, it's fun to run around blowing things up for about 5 minutes, but because there is zero risk, because you cannot lose, there are no stakes. It gets incredibly boring, incredibly fast. A story without stakes isn't a story, it's just a sequence of random events happening to a character who can't be hurt.
And that lack of stakes is precisely why the emotional resonance falls flat. But this casual, consequence-free dismissal of marital bonds doesn't just stop at individual affairs.
It goes deep.
It does. If characters feel no guilt breaking their vows, it is a very short intellectual jump to deciding the vow itself is the problem. And we see exactly that happening as Kim broadens her critique. She argues this leads directly to a much more systemic hostility toward the very institution of marriage itself across this entire genre of literature.
Right, which brings us to another novel Kim examines, a book titled Scaffolding, which is set in Paris. In this book, the deconstruction of foundational relationships becomes even more explicit, even more ideological.
How so?
Kim points out that in this novel, multiple women cheat on their partner, and the internal monologue of one of these characters is presented almost like a political manifest. The character thinks, I am sleeping with a man who is not my husband, and I feel shamed for it.
Yeah.
That's what we've been fighting for. Love and sex and bodies without shame, and that's what I'm laying claim to.
Let's really listen to the logic being deployed there. Kim is aghast at this specific line of reasoning. The character is essentially claiming that because women as a demographic have been historically oppressed over the centuries, she as an individual now possesses a retroactive license to act terribly.
Wow.
She is using historical feminist struggle to justify, as Kim phrases it, acting like a selfish degenerate and screwing over her partner.
It is the complete weaponization of historical grievance to justify personal cruelty. And it escalates dramatically in the text. There is a character in Scaffolding named Florence. Florence decides she wants to have a baby, but her husband he's not sure they are.
Which is a pretty normal relationship hurdle.
Right, totally normal. So what is Florence? While she is actively having an affair with 2 different men, she unilaterally decides to stop taking her birth control entirely without telling her husband.
That is just wow. The dialogue that follows this revelation is incredibly revealing regarding the ideological worldview the author is promoting. The husband eventually finds out she stopped her birth control, and his reaction is entirely grounded. He says to her, "My wife is having sex with 2 different men, and she chooses this moment to get pregnant. Isn't that a decision we should make together?"
Which is an incredibly reasonable response. He's not yelling. He's not being abusive. He is pointing out the sheer insanity of bringing a child into a situation where the mother is actively sleeping with 3 different people and hiding her reproductive choices from her primary partner.
Exactly. He is speaking as a rational partner in a shared life. But Florence's response to him is the ultimate trump card of this specific brand of modern feminism. She looks to him and says, "It's my body, and I can do what I like with it."
The husband, to his credit, tries one more time to inject some reality. He says, all right, but it's our life, and if you decide to have a baby with your body, it affects me as well, doesn't it? And Florence just totally stonewalls, says, well, I'm giving you fair warning. I am ready to be a mother, whether or not you are there to do it.
Kim makes a vital analytical point here regarding the author's intent versus the reality on the page. The husband in this scene is not portrayed as a villain. He might be slightly clueless or perhaps a bit passive, but he's fundamentally decent. Yet Florence's deeply deceptive, highly consequential, and unilaterally life-altering action is presented without any narrative condemnation. The authors writing these scenes, Kim argues, are so utterly consumed by the ideology of fighting the patriarchy and asserting bodily autonomy that they completely fail to realize they have written genuinely awful, toxic human beings. The ideology blinds the author to the reality of the character's profound cruelty.
And it all ties back to how these characters view the very concept of commitment. It's not just about sex, it's about what a promise actually. In that same book, another character dismisses the concept of marriage entirely, saying it's a form of discipline developed to keep society moving along like a big normative machine.
A big normative machine. That phrase is the crux of the ideological deconstruction we are talking about. It takes one of the most complex, deeply personal, and universally recognized human concept, the vow to bind your life to another person through sickness and health, and reduces it to a sterile, oppressive, sociological construct.
Just totally flattens it.
It strips the humanity, the romance, and the sacrifice entirely out of the equation, leaving only a cynical power dynamic.
And what's really striking is how Kim pushes back against. She does it with a truly surprising amount of earnestness. Like, she doesn't defend marriage using religious text or traditional conservative talking points. She defends it on a purely humanistic level.
That's a great point.
She describes marriage simply as a beautiful, moving promise between two people trying to navigate a difficult world together. She points out the massive irony that we live in a culture drenched in exaggerated, fake sense. We have thousands of pop songs about eternal love. We have endless romantic comedy. But when it comes to actual grinding daily commitment, modern literature treats it with almost zero earnestness.
It's all just thrown out the window.
She argues passionately that if people simply kept that one promise to each other, the world would be a tangibly better place. Much better than if the government just threw more money at massive social programs.
She finds the reflexive anti-marriage stance adopted by these authors to be not just sociologically damaging, but fundamentally boring from a narrative perspective. If an author wants to write a nuanced, difficult story about the real trade-offs, the compromises, and the grinding difficulties of a long-term marriage, Kim is entirely on board.
Right, bring on the complex stories.
But simply defaulting to an anti-marriage stance just to signal to the reader that you are a progressive or a radical feminist is, in her view, intellectually lazy.
So what does this all mean? Think about the media you consume Think about how often you see mere rebellion against traditional norms used as a complete substitute for an actual fleshed out character personality.
Well, it happens all the time.
If every single protagonist in modern mainstream literary fiction is a jaded anti-marriage cynic who views commitment as a normative machine, is that stance actually radical anymore? Or has the rebellion just become the new, incredibly tedious corporate stand?
It is the paradox of institutionalized rebellion. When nonconformity becomes the mandatory, industry-approved template, it is no longer nonconformity. It's just the new conformity.
Exactly.
And this idea that foundational human bonds, like monogamy and marriage, are merely artificial normative machines constructed by an oppressive society sets up the next major conflict Kim identified: the profound clash between this pervasive literary ideology and literal, hard-coded evolutionary biology.
This is where the deep dive takes a fascinating turn from literary critique into science, because Kim moves on to critique Sally Rooney.
Sally Rooney, yes, a massive name.
Right. Sally Rooney is arguably one of the most successful, most influential literary writers alive today. Her work essentially defines the millennial literary voice. Specifically, Kim looks at Rooney's hit book Conversation Friend. In that novel, a character makes a very confident assertion about the nature of
What'd you say?
The character claims that monogamy only exists to, quote, serve patrilineal societies by allowing them to pass property to their genetic offspring.
It is the ultimate Marxist feminist critique of love. It argues that the desire for a singular, committed partner has no root in human emotion or biology. It is strictly a mechanism for the economics of property transfer and patriarchal control over lineage.
Which Kim just does not buy.
Not at all. Kim expresses a profound, almost exasperated frustration with this viewpoint. She cannot believe how deeply modern literature is willing to deny basic biological reality to serve a sociological theory. She argues that the intense desire for exclusivity in a romantic sexual relationship is not merely a cultural artifact invented by property owners. It is a deeply physiological, evolutionary response to human bonding.
She gets into the evolutionary biology of it, and it makes total sense when you break it down. She points out the biological reality that human babies are incredibly expensive.
Expensive, like financially.
No, not in terms of buying diapers or paying for college, but in terms of biological energy, caloric intake, and time. Compared to almost any other mammal, human infants are born utterly...
Oh, right. Like how a horse can just walk immediately.
Exactly. A foal can stand up and run an hour after it's born. A human baby takes a massive amount of resources just to keep alive, and a very long time to mature enough to fend for itself. Because of this extreme vulnerability, a two-parent system was highly advantageous for the survival of the offspring in early...
Exactly. Kim points out that for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, women had significantly more to lose in non-monogamous, unstructured mating situations.
The stakes were huge.
Life or death. Really. If a woman became pregnant in an ancient, harsh environment and the man abandoned her, the immense burden of providing enough calories and protection for that resource-intensive child alone could quite literally be a matter of life and death.
Right.
Therefore, the physiological drive for exclusivity, the pang of jealousy, the deep desire for the partner to want only them, the release of bonding hormones like oxytocin, all of that was an evolutionary mechanism. It evolved to ensure the parents stayed together long enough to ensure the child actually survived to adulthood.
Here's where it gets really... Think about how absurd it is to deny that. Blaming the concept of monogamy entirely on the oppressive patriarchy, as these contemporaries, is exactly like blaming the fundamental human need to wear heavy winter coats entirely on the manipulative fashion.
Oh, that's a brilliant.
It completely ignores the actual environment. It ignores the literal freezing biology of the situation that made the behavior absolutely necessary in the first place.
Yeah, you can't just wish away winter.
You can certainly complain that winter coats are bulky or ugly or inconvenient, just like you can complain that monogamy is incredibly hard work. But denying why they exist, claiming they are just an arbitrary rule invented to press you, just delusional.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kim is making a structural critique about the believability of these narratives. When authors force their characters to dismiss evolutionary reality in favor of sociological buzzwords, those characters feel incredibly hollow to the reader.
They stop feeling.
Exactly. They stop sounding like complex human beings experiencing the visceral realities of love, fear, and jealousy. And they start sounding like sociology graduate students reading a thesis statement aloud. The denial of biology severs the reader's connection to the character's fundamental humanity.
And what's truly wild is that Kim points out this extreme detachment from reality isn't just limited to abstract theories about evolutionary biology or historical marriage structure. This ideological bubble bleeds directly into how these characters perceive and react literal, physical crises happening in the modern world around them.
Yeah, it colors everything they see.
This brings us to a part of the video essay that I think really highlights the absurdity of the genre, the discussion of the therapeutic sensibility and the Paris lock.
Yes, Kim examines an unnamed memoir for this section, which she notes was heavily promoted by the industry and landed on numerous best books of the year lists. The memoir is set in Paris, and crucially, the events take place during the intense COVID-19 lockdown.
Okay, so a very serious historical moment.
Very serious. The author of the memoir is writing about her experience during this time, subletting an apartment, going out when possible, eating food. But when the author finally addresses the reality of the lockdowns themselves, she writes a sentence that Kim finds utterly astonishing.
Hit me with.
The author writes, "During lockdown, I could have written 10 essays about the theft that has been committed on my time and mind by the belief I need to look better, younger, thinner."
Let that sentence really sink in for a moment. Kim explains her real-time reaction to reading those words. When she saw the phrase, "theft that has been committed on my time," she naturally, reasonably assumed the author was talking about literal, historical government lockdowns.
Right, the actual physical stripping of civil liberty, the inability to leave your home, the curfews, the halting of normal human life.
Exact. Kim even mentions a friend of hers whose mother was dying of cancer in a hospital during this exact period, and the friend was physically prevented by the government from visiting her mother to say goodbye. That is a tangible, agonizing theft of time and...
It's heartbreaking.
But no, the author of this highly lauded memoir completely ignores the historical trauma happening literally outside her window and instead claims the real theft of her time was societal beauty standards making her feel bad about her.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the ideological bubble Kim is critiquing. It represents a staggering inability to perceive anything outside of one's own immediate narcissistic grievances. To contextualize this, Kim brings in the work of the social critic Christopher Lasch, specifically his seminal 1979 book, The Culture of Narcissism.
Lasch is so important here. What did he actually mean by the therapeutic sensibility?
Lasch wrote about a massive cultural shift happening in the West. He argued that we were moving away from finding meaning in community, religion, or broad political action, and moving toward a culture where the pursuit of personal enjoyment, endless self-actualization, and individual therapy became the highest unquestionable goals of human existence.
So the self becomes the center of the...
Exactly. In this world, your internal feelings are the most important political reality. And Kim notes that the memoir's own promotional copy perfectly encapsulates. It actually calls the author's pursuit of pleasure and good food in Paris a political act.
Calling a lavish, self-indulgent vacation in Paris a political act. It's almost beyond parody. Kim points out that this worldview produces literature where actual world-altering historical events are completely ignored in favor of the most trivial, navel-gazing internal monologues.
It's a complete lack of perspective.
Imagine living through a literal historical crisis, a global war, a massive economic depression, or a worldwide pandemic that is killing millions, and using that massive historical backdrop to write an entire memoir complaining about a bad hair day or the pressure to go on a diet. It shows a profound, almost pathological lack of perspective, and the literary establishment...
Kim broadens this critique of modern narcissism to examine what she calls the female rage subgenre, which has become incredibly popular. She connects this to the proliferation of feminist street art the memoirist encounters in Paris.
Oh, the poster.
Yeah, the character walks around and sees posters pasted on walls saying things like, "Sexism is everywhere, so are we," and "Our skirts are short, not our ideas." But Kim focuses on one poster in particular that simply proclaims, "We are all heroines."
And Kim's response to that specific poster is delightfully blunt. She says, "No, we are not all heroines. You do not get to be a heroine simply by virtue of existing as..."
Right, it dilutes the word.
Completely. To claim that heroic title for merely being alive, for just waking up and going about your day, is deeply insulting to women who actually perform real, dangerous, self-sacrificing heroic acts.
It is the ultimate commodification of struggle. It strips the word hero of all its meaning. Kim points out that we have reached a bizarre cultural moment where massive multinational corporations are the ones spouting these feminist slogans to sell soap and sneakers and t-shirts.
Oh, corporate feminism.
Yes. When smashing the patriarchy is the primary marketing strategy for a global conglomerate trying to increase its quarterly earnings, it is no longer a revolutionary act. It is a corporate cliche, and the authors writing these books seem completely oblivious to the fact that their supposedly radical, edge-pushing characters are just parroting HR manuals and corporate marketing copy.
And this intense, blinding self-focus, this narcissistic demand to be viewed as a heroine without actually taking any heroic action, directly fuels how these characters exist in their fictional world. It dictates how they project their deep-seated insecurities onto everyone around them, particularly in their desperate attempts to perform what they think which leads us to Kim's breakdown of the illusion of confidence.
Yes, Kim goes back to that Paris memoir to illustrate this. She notes the author's constant, repetitive, almost aggressive declarations about herself throughout the text.
What kind of declaration?
The author constantly writes things like, I am a confident older woman, and I am powerful and alive, and I am unafraid of my own desires. Kim makes a brilliant, common-sense psychological observation here. People who are actually confident, people who possess genuine internal power and comfort in their own skin, do not need to constantly loudly declare it to the room.
It's the literary equivalent of a guy at a bar constantly telling everyone how tough he is or how rich he is. The louder he says it, the more times he repeats it, the less you believe him. You immediately know.
Exactly.
Kim argues that these endless declarations of being powerful and alive do not read as actual strength to the reader. They read as profound, vibrating insecurity. These characters have an obsessive hang-up about appearing independent to the audience because they secretly fear they are not.
And Kim ties this fake performative confidence back to the portrayal of casual sex in these novels. The memoirist describes hooking up with lots of different guys in Paris, painting this incredibly rosy, frictionless, empowering picture of the lifestyle.
Sounds like God mode.
Pretty much. But Kim, drawing again on evolutionary psychology and basic human observation, is highly skeptical of this portrayal. She argues that the vast majority of women are not psychologically wired to enjoy endless, anonymous, casual sex without eventually catching feelings, or at the very least, experiencing a profound sense of emptiness. The stakes, historically and biologically, are just too high for it to mean absolutely nothing.
But Kim is very careful here. She isn't saying the memoirist is necessarily lying to the reader on purpose to sell books. She suggests something far more interesting and a little tragic. She thinks the author is lying to herself.
Lying to herself, that's a strong claim.
Well, modern feminist ideology has taught these women that emotional attachment, vulnerability, and the desire for a stable, long-term partner are signs of weakness. They believe they should be able to emulate the stereotypical male detachment they see in pop culture. So they force themselves into these categories. They inevitably experience the emptiness or the heartbreak, but they paper over it in their writing incredibly loud, defensive declarations of bodily.
It is a profound irony. They are trying so hard to avoid the perceived weakness of traditional female attachment that they end up intentionally adopting the most hollow, emotionally stunted aspects of toxic male detachment.
Yep, they just swap one problem for another.
And Kim actually finds the perfect, almost comical example of this projection, but she finds it from a completely different angle. She looks at a wildly popular book called Fleischman is in Trouble.
This is a fascinating case. Fleischman is in Trouble is a novel written by a female author, Taffy Brodesser. But crucially, the book is told primarily from the first-person point of view of Toby Fleischman, a 41-year-old male protagonist who is a doctor and is newly single after a messy divorce.
Right, so we're inside his head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kim decides to scrutinize the very first paragraph of the novel, where this newly single man is observing the modern app-driven dating.
Let's look closely at how this paragraph is constructed. Toby Fleischman wakes up, looks at his dating apps, and realizes the city is crawling with women who want to sleep with him. But how does he internally describe these women?
I'm guessing not how a real guy.
You'd be right. He notes that they are self-actualized and independent. He notes that they knew what they wanted. He notes that they weren't needy and that they weren't insecure or self-doubting.
Kim actually counts them out on screen. In a single, brief introductory thought, this male character finds 5 different, highly therapeutic, sociological ways to describe these women as independent and not.
5.
And Kim asks the most obvious, devastating question. Is this how a newly single 41-year-old man actually thinks? Would a man, thrilled by his new sexual freedom after a stifling marriage, be mentally categorizing the women on his phone by their level of self-actualization?
Absolutely not. It defies all psychological realism. Kim, using basic common sense, points out that a real newly single guy looking at dating apps would be noticing that the women are attractive or young or fun or energetic or out of his league. He would not be using HR therapy speak to evaluate their emotional independence.
This raises an important question about authorship and psychological projection, because what we are reading in that paragraph is clearly not a realistic male internal monologue.
No, it is not.
What we are reading is the female author's own baked-in anxieties about female independence, awkwardly and unbelievably projected into the mind of her male protagonist. It is a massive failure of imagining. The author is so deeply entrenched in the ideological bubble of modern feminism that she cannot even conceive of a male perspective that doesn't prioritize her own specific ideological talking points.
It's a brilliant catch by Kim. Yeah. The author clearly wanted to write a book confirming that men truly love and desire strong, independent, non-needy women above all else, so she just used her male protagonist as a puppet to say the lines.
But to anyone outside the bubble, it feels entirely fake.
Which leaves Kim and us to the ultimate structural question of this whole deep dive. If these tropes, the consequence-free cheating, the denial of basic biology, the narcissistic navel-gazing disguised as politics, the fake confidence, the unbelievable projected dialogue, if these are so unrealistic, so hollow, and so repetitive, how on earth did they become the dominant voice in mainstream publishing?
Why are these the books piled high on the front tables at every bookstore in the country?
To answer that, Kim zooms way out. She moves from literary critique to a systemic critique of the industry itself. She points her analytical lens directly at the publishing world in New York.
What does she find?
She suggests that the publishing industry, including the highly influential MFA Master of Fine Arts programs that act as the primary pipeline for finding new authors, has become a monolithic echo chamber. It is an industry heavily dominated by women, and specifically women who share this exact singular ideological bubble we've been discussing.
The mechanics of this are important. When an entire industry, from the literary agents who first acquire the manuscript, to the editors who shape them, to the marketing teams who decide what gets pushed to the public, all share the exact same world, the art they produce inevitably becomes homogenous.
It's bound to happen.
It becomes the carefully manicured monoculture we talked about at the very beginning of the show. If everyone in the room agrees on what a good political message is, books that challenge that message simply don't get bought. But Kim goes further than just calling it an organic echo. She argues that person diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI initiatives, have fundamentally shifted the industry's focus away from judging a book on its merit and artistic quality and towards strict ideological conformity.
She makes a very pointed, very systemic claim here, that this ideological capture has resulted in active, measurable discrimination. She argues that men, and specifically straight white men, are being systematically shut out of the traditional publishing process entirely regardless of the quality of their writing.
To back this up, she doesn't just rely on speculation. She quotes a tweet from the legendary multi-award-winning author Joyce Carol Oates. Oates is an icon of American literature.
A total legend.
And Oates stated publicly that a literary agent friend of hers confided that he cannot even get editors at major publishing houses to read first novels by young, white male writers, no matter how good the prose. They are just fundamentally not interested in acquiring those.
Which is a devastating indictment of an industry that claims to champion diversity. Kim speculates that this overt systemic hostility might be a major reason why the data consistently shows that men are reading significantly less fiction nowadays.
Think about it. If the industry is actively telling you via public statements and publishing trends that they don't want your stories, and the stories they do publish feature female characters who constantly spout dialogue about how toxic and oppressive masculinity, why on earth would you spend your time and money engaging with that medium?
It is a sobering thought regarding the future of literature as a shared cultural touchstone. However, as your neutral guides through this material, we must pause here and perform a crucial nuance check.
Very important.
Because Kim is very careful to define the limits of her critique, and we must accurately reflect that. She explicitly states multiple times that she is not saying all contemporary women's literature is bad. She's not calling for a boycott of female authors or suggesting women shouldn't write.
Far from it. She actively acknowledges the absolute necessity of highlighting unique female struggles in literature. For instance, she specifically calls out narratives dealing with sexual assault, noting that these are vital, profoundly important stories that need to be told, and they need to be told by women who understand the psychological reality of that trauma.
Yeah, she definitely recognizes the value there.
She expresses a deep, genuine sadness that we don't have more historical literature written by women, lamenting the lack of female voices from antiquity to balance the historical record. And she even promises her audience that she will make future videos specifically reviewing good contemporary books written by women to highlight what works.
She is attempting to thread a very specific, very difficult needle, celebrating the inclusion of female voices in the literary canon while fiercely critiquing the ideological straitjacket straitjacket those voices are currently being forced to wear by the modern publishing industry.
Oh, and just to keep things grounded and remind us that we are watching a human being and not a manifesto-generating robot. Right in the middle of this heavy, intense critique of the publishing industry's systemic failures, Kim's cat wakes up from a nap and wanders right into the camera frame.
I love that moment.
It's so good. And she just stops her entire train of thought to say hi to the cat and give it a pet. It's this great, lighthearted, completely unscripted moment in the video that reminds you this is just a curious person observing the culture from her desk, trying to make sense of the art we consume.
It humanizes the whole thing.
It does. But that moment of levity, as charming as it is, doesn't erase the gravity of her final point. So I have to wonder aloud, and I pose this, if an industry artificially constrains who gets to tell stories and artificially mandates how those stories must be told to align with a specific, rigid political ideology, do we eventually just run out of interesting stories to tell? Are we actively sacrificing good, challenging, messy art for the sake of sterile ideological purity?
That is the existential threat to the medium. Art, at its core, is supposed to explore the unknown. It is supposed to ask questions it doesn't have the answers to. When literature is used merely to confirm pre-approved social theories, it ceases to be art and becomes propaganda.
Exact. So let's take a breath and summarize the incredible journey of this deep dive. We started with Kim's central, that a specific brand of modern feminism has shifted literature away from exploring the human condition and toward pushing a rigid ideology.
Right.
We examined how this creates characters who view remorseless, consequence-free infidelity as a birth, completely destroying narrative tension and viewership because they operate in a world without.
We then explored how this ideology attempts to deconstruct foundational human bonds, reducing the profound promise of marriage to a cynical normative machine. We look at how these narratives forcefully deny the literal evolutionary biology of human attachment, the reality of the resource-intensive human infant in favor of academic buzzwords about property transfer.
From there, we looked at the intense, almost unbelievable narcissism of the therapeutic sensibility. We saw authors ignoring literal global crises to complain about beauty standards and labeling themselves heroines just for waking up in the morning.
We unpack the illusion of loud fake content.
We sure did. And how authors project their own ideological anxieties into the minds of male characters, resulting in totally unbelievable dialogue. And finally, we examined the claim that the publishing industry itself has become a closed loop, an echo chamber that enforces this monoculture and actively discriminates against diverse viewpoints in the name of...
As we wrap up, I want to remind you of the core value we hope you've gained from this exploration today. You've been handed a new, highly specific, critical lens.
A very useful one.
The next time you walk into a bookstore, the next time you pick up a lauded contemporary novel from the display table, you can actively look for these patterns. You can ask yourself the hard questions as you read. Are these characters acting like real, flawed, complex human beings dealing with the crushing gravity of their choice? Or do they feel weightless, insulated from consequence? Are they exploring the world, or are they simply walking billboards for a specific brand of modern ideology? Recognizing the underlying architecture of the narrative is the first step to truly understanding it.
It changes how you read entirely. Once you see the scaffolding, you can't Which brings me back to where we started. We talked at the very beginning about literature acting as a mirror for society, but I want to leave you with this final lingering thought to mull over on your own.
What's the thought?
If the publishing industry is only willing to polish one tiny, highly specific corner of that mirror, if it only allows reflections that cater exclusively to the anxieties and ideology of a very specific, hyper-online, politically uniform demographic, what happens to the rest of us when we look into that glass searching for our own reflection? When the art stops trying to understand the vast, messy, contradictory world we actually live in and only tries to lecture it, does it eventually...
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next